Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt show Roberta Taylor. She's a psychotherapist who helps people to create a vision for life after retirement. And in fact, she wrote a book called The Couple's Retirement Puzzle, 10 Must-Have Conversations for Creating an Amazing New Life Together, which is being re-released in the summer. Roberta, real pleasure to have you.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
So the title of your book begs the question. Talks about the 10 must-have conversations. Could you give us a sense for maybe one or two of these conversations that people must have?
Sure. Well, I want to say that the emphasis is on communication. So the foundation of the book is really about communication, no matter what the topic is. So, timing of retirement, if, when, and how to retire. Couples and individuals need to think about that and talk about that with people in their lives. How your roles change and your identity changes after you retire. Talking about finances, you know a lot about that. That's a significant area, and it's a difficult area for a lot of people because they didn't grow up with permission to talk about money. It's kind of like sex, they were taboo issues.
Wait, don't say that word on the radio, right?
Uh-oh.
No, it's true. Well, when we talk about this, and this has certainly been a topic that's been on the Goldstein on Gelt show, and I talk about it with my own clients. My day job is that I'm a financial advisor. I only get to do the radio gig once a week, and I try to encourage people to communicate, and I think in my office they do, but quite frankly, in your field, you're working with people who've been married and communicating, possibly very poorly, for decades. What can you actually give them to change? What tools can you give them so they can really begin to talk to one another?
Well, the book really describes a process. And when I work with clients, they're in my office most often, and we really talk about communication and how you can develop a different way of communicating. And it starts with kind of ground rules. There's no blaming, no shaming. You really need to listen to what your partner is saying, because many of us are kind of listening, but we're already thinking about what's going to come out of our mouths next. It's not a great way to have a conversation. And to be able to ask your partner, what's important to you about that? Because often we don't know. Just making a time and space to have these conversations. So it's, it's really kind of taking the negative charge out of talking about finances, making it doable, and then practicing.
Well, let's drill into that a little more. In a lot of cases, certainly that I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen as well, it's often one spouse, and quite frankly, it's often the husband who has been in charge of the money. He's been the money side of the equation, and he doesn't respect his wife's opinion. So in other words, when you say, well, why don't you listen to what your wife has to say about it, he doesn't see it that way. He says, well, she doesn't understand, I'm the one who handles it. He may not say it quite so explicitly, but that's really the undertone. What can you do to bring him to the point where he realizes that maybe she's not interested in choosing stocks, but she certainly should have a say in the goal setting and the family relationship to money?
Yes. Well, one of the things that couples really need to think about is what would happen to a woman like this if her husband predeceased her. She'd kind of be lost. And I do feel that it's the responsibility of women to say, I need to learn more about this for my own sake. And I also encourage financial planners to support the woman, encourage the woman to talk when they're talking about finances. The husband then needs to understand that his wife may just feel overwhelmed with the whole idea of managing finances, but it's so important for the future.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a very, very good point. One of the ways that I've tried to describe it to people, I run sort of a traditional financial planning investment company, is I'll tell them, the husband says, well, I'll come in, I'll do the plan with you, and then I'll tell my wife. And I say, no. at least for the financial planning process, you both have to be involved, because that's where we're talking about big picture issues, how you want your life to look, where you want to live, what you'd like to do with your money. I say if the two of you decide that the husband's going to be involved in specifics on day-to-day investment decisions, that's fine. But I certainly think that they need to communicate about the big picture issues. We're talking with Roberta Taylor, who's a psychotherapist who helps people to vision life after retirement, and she's written a book called The Couple's Retirement Puzzle, 10 Must-Have Conversations for Creating an Amazing New Life Together. She's been talking to us about the importance of communication. Tell us more of the 10 must-have conversations that people must have.
Well, certainly one is how to deal with family relationships. What's happening today is people are living longer and healthier lives, so that what we call the sandwich generation have older parents who they often feel responsible for, and adult children who unfortunately have been moving back home in droves because of the economy. They get divorced, they lose their job, they can't find a job.
Right.
And I know many, many people, clients and friends, whose adult children are living with them. So that is an extremely stressful situation for everybody. And again, it goes back to communication. So that's a big one that people talk about. Where to live. A lot of people today are downsizing, thinking about, do I want to move out to the West Coast if they're on the East Coast to be near my children? Do I want to live in the city? Do I want to live in the suburbs? There are lots of choices and opportunities, but I always caution people, if you think you want to move to another location, maybe you want to move to Israel, then it makes a lot of sense to go and live there for a while and see what it's really like.
And what do you do in cases where one spouse, for example, is, I would say, stubborn or intransigent, but just maybe likes where she's living, and the other one says, well, I'd really like to move, and they're kind of entrenched in their position? What's a good way to deal with that?
Right. So, and you're right, people get polarized in their positions, and they can't imagine either staying or going. One of the things that I always talk with couples about is keep an open mind. Be flexible. Sometimes compromise is really necessary. So, you may kind of be stuck in your position, and then you get to see things black and white. But if you think about the gray areas, maybe there's a way to compromise that. And a good example, actually, is a couple that I work with who are in their 60s. She wanted to stay in the Boston area. He wanted to move to Florida. And they were really at loggerheads. And after doing some work together, they could see that it was possible for him to go down to Florida during the winter months, which can be brutal here, and, be there, and maybe she could go down for a weekend, he could come back for a weekend, and she could be here. So that's a kind of compromise. It's
a pretty radical solution, no? So now they're living in two different apartments?
But just for 2 or 3 months during the winter. And they do get to see each other. And, the result of that was very interesting because they'd never been apart. And they both got to experience what it was like to have to be more independent. And the rest of the time, the rest of the year, they're together here in the Boston area. Mm-hmm. So it's possible.
So you don't only work with people who are already retired, but also people who are planning their retirement. And, of course, there's the financial angle here, too, which is often a trade-off between saving for the future and either paying your own bills or helping your children to pay for college. And that often is a real point of tension. How do you help people through that?
That is a tough one. Hopefully people will have saved, but we know that that's not always true.
The average American has under $1,000 in savings or something.
Right. So, I'm not a financial planner. I can help people communicate around finances, but I always advise my clients to work with a financial planner, to really look at their assets, to look at what they have available, and to think about what their goals are. That's really important, because some people, want to be able to support their kids through college. Other people say, okay, you need to get a part-time job here. Mm-hmm. So there are all different solutions. Again, they've got to talk about it.
Right, and I do think that a big part of what we do in the financial plan is the goal setting, and it forces people to come up with a number. In other words, at the end of the day, how much do you want to help your child? And then when they see the financial plan, it says, okay, listen, if you pay this much towards tuition, this is how much income you'll have through your retirement. Are you prepared to drop your lifestyle, for example? And then I think when people see it in black and white, it certainly makes it a little bit easier for them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Listen, Roberta, we're running out of time, but first of all, it's been fascinating. In the last few seconds, tell us, how can people learn more about the work that you're doing and follow you?
My website is pathmaking.com, and people can look at that and check it out and see what kind of resources are available and the kind of work I do. I do work on the phone, so that doesn't have to be an obstacle to working together. And I'm very passionate about what I do. I love what I do, and I love working with this population. I'm also in that population, although retirement is not a word in my vocabulary. And, people really don't retire in the same way. It's much more today about what you're moving towards rather than where you're coming from.
I think that is a very important lesson, and that certainly gives everyone something to think about. We've been talking to Roberta Taylor, who's a psychotherapist. She wrote a book called The Couple's Retirement Puzzle, 10 Must-Have Conversations for Creating an Amazing New Life Together, which is being re-released in August. And she's working on a new book called Giving Voice to Single Women 60 and Forward. And Roberta will certainly look forward to having you back on the show to discuss that, and we'll put a link to your website as well as to your books at the show notes at goldsteinongelt.com. Thanks again so much for your time.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.